Hello, Shining Star families. I'm so glad to see you. I have been missing you, boys and girls, so much, and I really wanted to find a great way for us to keep sharing our learning together, even though we are in our own houses right now. I hope that your first week of doing school at home has gone really well, and I am very, very excited to share that I think this is a way we can finish reading The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick together. Part of this opportunity is possible because the publisher of this book, Scholastic, has given permission for me and other teachers to read their books online, and that's something unusual and something special, so I'm really grateful for that. I also am lucky that even though our copy of the book is locked up in my classroom, which is being cleaned right now, I have a copy of the book from our Williamsburg Regional Library that I can read digitally. So I'm going to get started on that. I will try and show you the pictures, but I do have all of my cameras set up, so I apologize if that doesn't work out, if we can't quite get the camera to turn the right direction. You might just have to make those images in your head, that movie that we talk about seeing when you're reading, okay? All right, I'm going to start just a couple of pages back. Hugo and Isabelle and Mama Jean and Monsieur Tabard and Etienne had all just broken into the locked bedroom that Papa George was in with the projector after he found that the two men from the Film Academy had shown up at his house. And Papa George is finally explaining to Hugo and Isabelle how all of this came about. So Isabelle says, "Me?" And Papa George says, "You. My father made movies with you? Your father was the cameraman in my last several movies. Your mother was a teacher at a local school, and I loved them very much. After they died, you came to live with us. You were the only bright spot in a very dark world. I made my wife promise she would never talk about my movies again. I shut the door on my past. I burned my old sets and costumes. I was forced to sell my movies to a company that melted them down and turned them into shoe heels. With the money I made from the sale of my films, I bought the toy booth where I've been trapped ever since, listening to the sounds of shoe heels clicking against the floor. The sound of my films disappearing forever into the dust. I was haunted by those ghosts for many years. The only thing I could bring myself to destroy was the the only thing I couldn't bring myself to destroy was the automaton, which I donated to the local museum, but they never put it on display, and then the museum itself burned. The only thing left was the extra key I'd made for my wife as an anniversary present long ago, and even that disappeared eventually. I thought the automaton was gone forever, but I was wrong. Miraculously, it survived. Tell me, where is it now?" "I have it at the train station," said Hugo. What's it doing at the train station? That's a very long story, said Hugo. "Bring it to me." "Yes, sir," Hugo said. "I'll be right back." Chapter 9, The Ghost in the Station. Hugo put on his shoes and raced through the rain back to the train station, which was still crowded with travelers. He had no idea how he was going to manage it, but he couldn't wait to bring the automaton to George Méliès. He shook himself dry like a dog and sprinted across the crowded halls, excitement coursing through his body. His hand was hurting, and he knew it was going to be hard to carry the automaton back to the old man, so he stopped at the cafe to get some more ice, making sure no one was watching. He grabbed a handful as well as another bottle of milk. The newspaper vendor was talking with the owner of the cafe. "I don't believe it. Here? Are you sure this is true, Madame Emily?" said the newspaperman. "Yes, Monsieur Frick," she answered. "My friend cleans the police station, and she overhears a lot," said Madame Emily. "I saw her on my way back to work this morning. She told me that the police found a body at the bottom of the Seine River a few days ago." Hugo wanted to leave, but there was something about the woman's tone that made him stay. He crouched by the side of the cafe. "No one knows about this yet, but they will," continued Madame Emily. The river was being dredged, and they found the body of a man down there. He's been at the bottom for a very long time, years maybe. My friend said that last night they finally figured out who it was, and they were only able to identify him by a silver piece hanging to the inside of his pocket. It took them a while to clean it off and read the name inscribed on the bottom. Guess who it turned out to be? Hugo already knew the answer. "Remember the old timekeeper of the station?" continued Madame Emily. "It was him, gone for years." Hugo knew she was wrong about that. Uncle Claude could only have been gone for a few months, but he wasn't going to correct her. "Oh my," said Monsieur Frick, who was used to being the only one who knew things first. "Well, I guess nobody seemed to miss him." "But don't you see what this means?" Madame Emily said. "The clocks in the station should have stopped working when he drowned, so no one was because no one was taking care of them. But they didn't. They kept running perfectly, and we all know why they were running perfectly, don't we? The timekeeper was resting comfortably at the bottom of the river. Obviously, he didn't want to be bothered, and his ghost kept the clocks running. But then they went and disturbed him, and haven't you noticed? The clocks are all breaking down. The station is haunted." At that moment, Hugo accidentally dropped the ice and the bottle of milk, which shattered loudly on the stone floor. As Madame Emily spun around and spotted him, she yelled, "My milk! So you're the one who's been stealing from me!" Hugo ran into the crowds as quickly as he could and disappeared into the walls, his head still reeling from what he had just heard. Back in his room, he took a few minutes to catch his breath. Then, because he had to get back to Isabel's house as quickly as possible, he moved all the boxes away from the automaton's hiding place. He dragged the machine into the room and walked around it a few times, trying to figure out the best way to lift it up with his injured hand. Finally, he made sure it was completely covered. Finally, he made sure it was completely covered with the fabric so it would be protected from the rain, and then he leaned the mechanical man into the crook of his elbow. With his good hand, he managed with great difficulty to lift it up. He yelped in pain and staggered toward the door, which, out of habit, he'd closed behind him when he came in. He knew he would have to put down the mechanical man to open the door, and he was trying to figure out the least painful way to do that when there was a knock. "Isabel?" Hugo said. With a great deal of force, the door flew open. For a moment, all Hugo could see was green. The station inspector burst in like a hurricane, followed immediately by Madame Emily and Monsieur Frick. The station inspector grabbed Hugo by the arm. Hugo yelled out. Into his horror, he dropped the mechanical man, which landed on the ground with an awful, ringing crash. "That's him!" yelled Madame Emily. "He's been stealing milk and croissants from me for months." "I saw the whole thing," cried Monsieur Frick. "He's a thief." "Thank you both very much. I'm glad you were able to follow the boy. Now, please, I'll take care of things from here." "What is this place?" asked Monsieur Frick, looking around. "It's the timekeeper's apartment," said the station inspector. "The timekeeper?" shrieked Madame Emily. Turning white as ghosts, she and Monsieur Frick ran from the doorway of Hugo's room. The station inspector rolled his eyes and now focused his attention on Hugo, who was writhing in his arms. "Stay still!" he shouted. But his face changed immediately from anger to confusion when he looked down at the bundle lying on the floor. "What is going on in here? What is that?" Other details about the station inspector, things that Hugo had never noticed before, came into focus. The man had bad teeth. The top part of one of his ears was missing. He smelled slightly of cabbages. The station inspector, not letting go of Hugo, leaned over and moved the fabric until he could see the mechanical man lying on its side, its neck bent backwards. "What in the world?" he said. The station inspector walked around the room, dragging Hugo after him, poking his head into doors and cabinets. At last he came to the pile of Uncle Claude's unopened paychecks. "What has happened to the timekeeper? How did you know about his apartment here in the station and the tunnels in the walls? Where is he?" "Please, my fingers are broken. Grab my other arm. It hurts too much," Hugo cried. The station inspector saw the bandage and loosened his grip, at which point, like a wild animal, Hugo escaped. All right, here's some pictures. We'll see if we can get that to work. Let's keep going. Crash! Hugo smashed into someone's back, fell to the floor, looked up, and saw the hand of the station inspector as it closed in on him. He tried to roll the other way, but he found himself stopped by Madame Emily and Monsieur Frick, who descended on him through the crowd like vultures. They grabbed Hugo roughly and dragged him to his feet. "Let me go!" cried Hugo. Hot tears welled in his eyes. The station inspector leaned in close to Hugo's face as the cafe owner and the newspaperman held tightly to each arm. "The only place you're going is to prison," the station inspector hissed. Chapter 10. A train arrives in the station. "What should we do with him?" asked Monsieur Frick. "Follow me," said the station inspector, who led them back to his office. He opened the metal cell in the corner and they threw Hugo inside. Then he quickly locked the cage, which Hugo had always feared so much, and tucked the key back into his pocket. The station inspector turned to Madame Amélie and Monsieur Frick. "I promise you both you won't escape this time. I'll call the police, and you'll never be bothered by this slippery rat again." The station inspector smiled when he said this, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a mean and dangerous smile. Madame Amélie and Monsieur Frick bid farewell to the station inspector, leaving him alone with Hugo. The station inspector called the police station, then said to Hugo, "Are you sure you don't want to confess now? No? Well, then I'll be back with a few of my friends. Don't go anywhere while I'm away." The station inspector laughed as he left the office and closed the door behind him. Hugo sat there like an animal, wet and shivering in the corner of his cage. He wished Isabelle were here with him, with one of her bobby pins. Hugo was left by himself for a long time. He was going to be put in prison now, or an orphanage. He was sure of it. The mechanical man would be thrown away. He'd never see Isabelle or her godparents again. He covered his eyes with his hands. Finally, the door of the office opened, and in came the station inspector with 2 policemen. Hugo stood up and tried to back himself farther into the corner of the tiny cage. "He won't talk?" said one of the policemen. "Nothing," said the station inspector. "Well, maybe a ride to the police station will help out a little. Come on, boy, your limousine is waiting." The station inspector opened the cage, and Hugo saw his opportunity. Once again, he made a dash for it. He slipped between the police officers and ran back to the station. It was crowded today, and Hugo bounced from person to person as they shuffled through the station. By the time he came into a clearing, he had lost his sense of direction. He turned and saw the station inspector coming closer, with the 2 policemen right behind him. Hugo thought he saw Madame Amélie and Monsieur Frick closing in quickly too. And I think that is where we will stop for today. We will come back and finish a little bit more tomorrow. In the meanwhile, I hope you are having a lovely time at home with your family and doing a great job on your family tasks and your school tasks. And please reach out if I can be of any help. Bye!